Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman, and here today to preview Rutgers, Iowa, taking place this Saturday in Iowa City, and welcoming back Jeffrey the Greek, former Iowa player, both under Hayden Fry and Kirk Ferentz. Jeffrey, thanks for being back.
Thanks for having me back. Great to be on the podcast. As exciting time as ever. It's in your Big Ten history to talk about Rutgers football. Let me ask you a question. I think you guys, meaning Rutgers fans, are in a unique situation. I want to get your thoughts real quick. But your main goal, or a high goal, right, of Rutgers was to get bowl eligible. You were bowl eligible with like a third of the season left. And let's be honest, it's not a real threat to win the Big Ten East, right? So you're in this between area where you hit a major goal. The biggest goal is kind of off the table. These last 3 or 4 games, are you viewing them as just fun, stress-free football contests? Like, I'm kind of envious of the position that Rutgers fans are in right now.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a little bit of both. It's like intended to be stress-free, playing with house money, but I actually was surprised by how many people were kind of not happy after the Ohio State game. Part of that is because Rutgers had a legitimate chance. Listen, they outplayed them for parts of that game. And I think that it's almost like when you surprise and you exceed expectations, then all of a sudden expectations keep growing. It's not like this balance. It's just the better you do, the more expectations grow. And then when you fail, even if it's, losing to number 1 Ohio State, giving them their best game they've ever had in that series, people were upset. So, yeah, it's, I think actually this game, a lot of people are thinking Rutgers can win. And I think if they don't, people are going to be disappointed. I don't think it's going to be looked at as just icing on the cake. I think if Rutgers loses out at this point, I think although you still have to judge the season as an overall success, I think a lot of fans would still be disappointed that they weren't able to build on the early success they had.
Interesting. So example number 3 billion, how you really can't make a college football fan happy unless you basically win the whole thing or win the Big Ten or whatever. That's the only way college football fans are happy. Doesn't matter what fan base they cheer for.
Yeah, listen, beating Iowa in Iowa would be the signature win of the program since joining the Big Ten. So I think the yearning for getting a signature win is really the driving force. That being said, if they beat Iowa, even if they lose to Maryland in 2 weeks, Rutgers fans are going to be really upset. So, yeah, I mean, ideally, if they could get to 8 wins, I think that's about as good as you could have expected, and potentially improves your bowl game too.
Right.
But that's actually an interesting segue into your situation because you guys are 7-2. Your defense is great once again. Obviously, offensive struggles, which have been well documented. I'm curious the dynamic in the program right now. It did seem, from an outsider's perspective, a little bit of a surprise last week with, the athletic director it seemed like forcing Kirk Ferentz to announce his son was not returning Brian for offensive coordinator next year. Just wanted to get your kind of insight on how all that went down and I guess how it's been received in general by Iowa fans.
The acting athletic director, Beth Gatz, announced it. Is exactly where that decision came from. I don't know if we'll ever know that. Maybe she was part of the team, but that's to be determined. I can assure you this much. Getting rid of Brian Ferentz in season was not Coach Ferentz's call. And he was upset, understandably so, because this was a decision that was taken out of his hands as the head coach, but also the thing that I think it was upset the most about was that it happened in season. KF is notorious about how he goes about things. He has said multiple times, I mean, we're talking like hundreds of times over the last 24 years, that he doesn't like making in-season moves because he views them just as a distraction. So for somebody to come in and do that as they're getting ready to prep, for Northwestern last week, he was upset. And I support my former head coach's anger in that capacity. I'm still up in the air if this was something that I wanted to happen in season. Don't think it would have made much of a difference if we would have waited till after the season. As far as how the Iowa fan base has took it, I don't think you'll find very many Iowa fans that aren't excited to have the thought process of a new play caller and leader of the offense happening somewhat soon, right? The acting athletic director even went so far as to say not only will he not be back as OC, he will not be back in any capacity. So they're taking the nepotism situation just completely off the table. And then the last, $10,000 question that Iowa fans are asking that I certainly don't have the answers to is, now that BF, Brian Ferentz, is removed from the situation, does it change that much? Meaning, Kirk Ferentz is still the one calling the shots. This is still, quote unquote, his offense. So how much different will it look? That's the question, and that we won't get answered until we're 2, 3, 4 games into the 2024 season. So we got a ways to go on that one.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation from being another Big Ten school, just watching it go down. I mean, it doesn't seem that surprising going into, all the scrutiny he had last year and going into this year. But in terms of, like, he's still calling the plays, right? Like last week, he's still the acting offensive coordinator right now.
Yeah, and that was what I tried to warn people about. When I say people, I mean Iowa fans. Listen, fan is short for fanatic, right? And I people thought there was going to be some sort of revelation happen with the offense now that we know that Brian Ferentz isn't coming back. You still have the same personnel. We are still thoroughly limited by the person playing QB right now, right? So like, and to just switch it up, I mean, from what I can gather, for all intents and purposes, Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz did not know until that weekend. So to turn around and have a completely new system game plan that Monday when they're just putting in prep for Northwestern, it's just not realistic. It's people, come on. I know not everybody's been inside a locker room where the sausage is made, but you have to understand that just doesn't switch like that. We're not suddenly going to switch to the air raid in 4 days and take on Northwestern. So like it was going to look the same. There is nothing coming to save this offense, from now through the bowl. Hopefully there's incremental, improvements, but that's what they were going to work on anyways. And whether Iowa fans like to hear it or not, the best person to try to make those incremental improvements is the person that's been coordinating the offense for the last 6-7 years, which is Brian Ferentz. So that's the best person they have in staff, and that's how it's going to roll till the end of the year.
Yeah, everything you said makes perfect sense to me, but I think Deion Sanders disagrees with you because he making that change at offensive coordinator last week, which is crazy.
And how that helped them the next game.
Yeah, it just seems like a real rookie move in terms of a head coach not, just grasping that concept that, you're not going to be able to just make those.
You know the expression, all hat, no cattle, from a guy that wears that cowboy hat all the time. Maybe it fits Deion perfectly.
And in terms of just there was a little bit of improvement offensively at the beginning of the season. Obviously, that didn't last long. And Cade, you talked about, I mean, one thing I found interesting in letting him go now is the offense has been decimated by injuries. I mean, all the talent at the skill positions, right? More or less, your tight end Eric All, obviously Cade McNamara. I forget the running back's name that's out. But yeah, how is that how much has it been scheme related? How much has it been personnel related?
See, all of the above would be my, because I mean, you can't lose your number one quarterback, number one and two receivers. I mean, for sure with Luke Lachey, and I would say Eric All as well. We were down to our third running back for several weeks, down offensive linemen. There was dinged up wide receivers. I mean, it's incredible. Like Iowa fans behind the scenes, we just sit there and say, it's incredible. We feel like we could roll out 11 junior high guys on the defense, and they would mold into this impenetrable unit every year. Same with special teams. on the other side, we're so snake bit on offense. Like, is this how the football gods have just served it up to us? Like, this is how you guys are just going to have to, enjoy, or I put enjoy in in quotation marks, your football, because it's just incredible. It happens every year. You can't deny the snake bittedness of the offense because it's happened again. So yeah, it's definitely personnel. But on the other side, my hill that I die on with Iowa fans all the time is they think our offensive line is so bad. I'm not saying our offensive line is stellar. I believe, though, if you put this offensive line behind better schemes and, most importantly, a more mobile quarterback, you would suddenly realize that the offensive line isn't that bad. I do watch every snap of Iowa football. I watch as much snaps of every Big Ten game. I'll be watching these MAC games tonight. I'm a junkie for college football. And what I see is a lot of bad O-line play, or what would be considered bad O-line play 20 years ago is now the norm. And the way to save yourself from drive stalling and taking 7-yard sacks is to have a quarterback with pocket presence that can throw with his legs or just run out of trouble. Iowa doesn't have that right now. I'm angry on how little we've had that over the past, 10 years or so. But that's my take. A little bit better schemes, mobile quarterbacks. Suddenly, a lot of things look a lot better.
That makes a lot of sense. In terms of the defense, obviously, been standout once again, one of the best in the Big Ten. What has continued to be this, or what has been the strength of this defense this year?
I mean, you got to say the strength is Phil Parker, because the one common thing, with all of these defenses for the past 5, 6, 7 years has been Phil Parker coordinating the defense. So you got to give a shout out to PP right there. Outside of that, maybe it's a name Rutgers fans wouldn't know, but Jay Higgins, middle linebacker, after losing All-American Jack Campbell to a first round of the NFL draft last year. Now, I'm not saying he's as good as Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell could go down as one of the greatest linebackers ever. But as far as the season he's having, it's incredible. I mean, he's made the semifinalists for the Butkus Award. I fully expect him to be first-team All-Big Ten. If not in the running for first-team All-American, he's incredible. And yet, Cooper DeJean, our quarterback returner, now playing offense, probably the most talented guy on the defense. So those are the two names, but man, mixed in between those is a whole lot of great defensive linemen that roll in and out, other good linebackers, other solid defensive backs. Sebastian Castro also having an absolutely monster year. So all the bad things you say about Iowa's offense, it turns into superlatives for Iowa's defense, and this year is no exception. It's an excellent defense.
Well, one thing I feel like doesn't get spoken about enough about Iowa, because I relate to it as a Rutgers fan, is that for many years, and our defense was never at the level that at least in recent years that Iowa's been. But this year, obviously, I think we're pretty close to that. Is the defense suffering because of the offense? And I feel like one thing that Iowa doesn't get credit for is I feel like they're a very mentally tough team, because even though you have the worst offense in college football, you keep winning games, and that has to take a toll on the roster, especially the defense, to be able to stay in it week after week, but you continue to win games. I guess, what are your thoughts just in terms of, how much that comes from Ferentz and just the culture of the program?
My thoughts are, I'm very impressed with that question and the fact that you're able to think through that, because you would think a pretty high percentage of our own fan base hasn't take that into consideration. My brother and I just had this conversation like hours ago. And we're both ex-college football players, and we were talking about that same thing. Like, I just don't think people understand how rare it is to have the mentality that Kirk Ferentz can instill in these football teams every year. Shiano's got it too, right? There's other coaches that have it, but the consistency that Kirk Ferentz can do, where I swear, it's like, for an analogy, the top could come off the airplane, right? And if Kirk Ferentz is piled in that thing, it's going to land every time. And the passengers, which are the football team, don't even scream and like go nuts. They just know that it's going to work out. They trust in the process, and it works. It doesn't look pretty, but they're always together. They all kind of sound the same. Like it's definitely one of the things I admire about our head man.
Yeah, well, and like I said, from my perspective, I mean, Shiano has definitely tried it in the past, and years ago in his first tenure was able to kind of have the success Ferentz did in that regard. But they also had some good offenses back then. But this is the first time since he's been back, where the defense and the rest of the team has been good enough and also mentally strong enough to hold up, through adversity. And the offense is getting a little bit better. You touched on offensive line. I guess, what are your initial impressions? I know we've touched base about Rutgers throughout the year. What are your impressions, I guess, as an Iowa fan, concerns about this matchup?
I'd like to out kind of with a question to you, if I could. It's a comment and a question kind of wrapped in one. My comment is that it's incredible where I've watched a ton of Rutgers football, and we went into the year knowing that Aaron Lewis was kind of the go-to name for the Rutgers defense. But now, Toure, Longer Beam, Flip Dixon, my point and question is, it's incredible how you really can't pull out a star from this defense. And I want to be clear, I mean that as a compliment. I'm not saying there aren't good players and individuals, but it seems to be a different player every week, one half to the other. It might be secondary led one week, linebacker the next. Do you have that same feel yourself as a Rutgers fan? And would be the one or two, singular MVPs of this Rutgers defense, because that's what I think the strength is it's all spread around.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I look at it the same way. I mean, they've elevated the starters in a way that, they haven't had this good of a defense, this talented of a defense in many years. And Motoré has had a huge influence, being out last year with the injury. He led them in sacks, in 20 and 21, but he's a much more complete player this year. And I think actually tearing his ACL in the spring a year and a half ago, helped him in the sense of he had more time to recover before the season. I think he really worked on certain things in the film room and just, having a better understanding. And now, they lose Tyreen Powell, who, was another name that, was week after week, arguably their most consistent defensive player. But now you're able to just slide in a Motoré in a way that Rutgers hasn't had that kind of depth either, where there's really no drop-off. They lose a little bit of versatility there because they were able to move Toure around a little bit more. They were even tinkering with a 3-3-5 at times. They were starting to, and now that's kind of a little bit on the back burner. But, yeah, I mean, Aaron Lewis obviously gets a ton of attention. But even, a guy like Maya Nahanatu, has been very good inside this year. Wesley Bailey's been a little hot or cold, but he's a guy that, when he's on, he can change a game. And then, the secondary safeties, we had a big question going into the season. I mean, we have three safeties that are in the pros, with Christian Isian down in Tampa Bay, and then they lost Christian Braswell, and then Avery Young. And then you have, Desmond Igbenusin has been really good at times. They have so much confidence in their corners in Melton and Longerbeam that their safety blitz has been very effective for them this year. And the number of guys you look, I mean, obviously stats aren't everything, but just the diversity in stats. Everybody's got a sack and a forced fumble. Everybody's got a handful of missed tackles for loss. So Flip Dixon has been tremendous. Motoré has been tremendous. I think those are the two additions that have kind of elevated the defense and made everybody else better. And they've had to worry less about. They're just worried about their role. And I also think the buy-in. They're swarming on every play, and even offensively, everybody's blocking. So I think to see the culture grow, and Shiano even said this week, someone said something about how do you feel like you compare to Iowa, and he was like, Iowa. He's like, please, like and I think for wise Rutgers fans have always thought that, like, Iowa for us is like, that would be amazing if we could be Iowa in terms of the culture, in terms of the consistent winning. in terms of the toughness. That's kind of been, people say, oh, we want to be Penn State. That's not really realistic, but Iowa has done so much. And I think Shiano really resonated with that this week. So I think the defense is finally taking that next step. And like you said, any of the starters really can change the game with one play. So that's been a big step forward.
Yeah, and ironically, and I think there's a ton of respect I would be willing to bet between Shiano and Kirk Ferentz. I think they're cut out of the same coaching cloth a little bit there. I can't remember what game it was. I wish I had a better memory, but you were wearing your all black uniforms early in the year. I'm almost positive it was a non-conference game. Do you know what game that is off the top of your head?
Temple. Yeah, it was Temple.
Okay, so in part of it was maybe because you're going against Temple, but like I said, I'm a sicko. I watch these games on replay to know as much as I can. So I watch that game. I mean, Big Ten and 60, man, it makes it easy, right? You just flip it on. You can get through it in 20 minutes. That was my moment with Rutgers where I'm like, wow, these guys are swarming to the ball. They are confident in their reads defensively. They are flying around making plays. And I feel like it's looked like that all year. Very early in the process, I had been telling Iowa fans, don't be counting that Rutgers game as a win. I'm telling you, these guys are going to be tough. And you just got better, And on the better side, probably is the offense. I think you listen to the Eyes on Big podcast, at least somewhat, regularly. And we talk about the fun guy, Kyle Manon guy, all season long, and it's not just because he's good. It's the style of running that we love. And his interviews, I love his interviews that I've heard him too. I mean, he's my favorite player outside of the Iowa roster in the Big Ten this year. I've said that on the podcast. We love the guy. So he's looked great either because of that or in part of that, your offensive line, which I thought would be a semi-disaster coming into the year, has been fine. I mean, it's certainly, I would think, exceeded expectations of Rutgers fans. And then you mix all of that together, and Gavin Wimsatt has looked better, right? I mean, nobody's going to squint their eyes and think that he is a amazing downfield thrower, CJ Stroud, type. But he's looked more comfortable. I don't think there's really been much time this year where you've thought, is this our guy at quarterback? That's your guy at quarterback. So that's been, there's still steps to be taken there, right? Sure. But that's been fun to watch too with the offense. And it's all fit together with the Shiano mantra of not turning the ball over, winning the turnover battle as often as possible. And that's why you're 6-3 with your 3 losses being against Michigan on the road, Wisconsin on the road, and at home versus Ohio State. On the stupid college football playoff stuff, they talk about good losses. Well, nobody's got 3 better losses, than Rutgers. So like that's something people should take into account too. Like they're 6-3, but look at the 3 losses a lot of teams would lose versus those programs.
Yeah, that's all great points. I think the thing that intrigues me the most about this matchup now is like no one thought that Rutgers could run on Ohio State. Everything all week was, they're going to have to trust Wimsatt. They're going to have to give him some opportunities. Because there's no way you're going to be able to consistently run against Ohio State. And to see the offensive line push around the Buckeyes front 4 at times, Monungai, like you said, the way he runs, it was delightful, but it was shocking at the same time.
Yeah.
And part of my concern and optimism in this game is Rutgers physically going to be able to match the what they did against Ohio State? Is there going to be a little bit of a hangover, so to speak? And if they can match their physicality against Iowa, are they going to be able to run against them as well? I would have said absolutely no a week ago. Where today I'm sitting here thinking, well, maybe they can run enough to get enough points to be able to pull this off.
Yeah, that is going to be one of the most intriguing parts of this game is what's the rushing attack going to look like for either offense? But starting with Rutgers, typically teams are going to struggle running up the middle versus Iowa. We're very strong, at point of contact. What I would have been most concerned about same thing, before the Ohio State game was Wimsett on more of an RPO, keeping it and getting the edge. Every defense has issues with that. Iowa is no different. So that is still something that's a concern for me. But Rutgers showing unique ways to get the ball to the edge with Monangai, that's something that's going to be interesting, right? And my guess is Phil Parker will have something for that. Watch for Rutgers to have success early in the game on offense, and then Phil Parker to put the clamps down. It happens a lot. Like I watch a lot of Iowa, and it happens a lot. So we'll see how that start, goes for Rutgers. If they are able to move the ball early, can they reward, that effort with points? That's huge. 3 points are going to be huge in this game, right? So like that is going to be interesting to see. And then with Wimsett, where Iowa is most susceptible, in my opinion, is up the middle against the pass. As strong as they are against the run, more athletic tight ends can pose a problem. Johnny Langan would be a person that would concern me as an Iowa defensive coordinator. I would think he would be a big part of the plan. The issue, though, then goes back to Gavin Wimsett. When he steps and throws, okay, when he's in rhythm and makes confident throws, he can wing it. He doesn't do that regularly. He's not consistent. If he does get off base, which Iowa's really good at getting quarterbacks off base, that's where the picks come from, where Iowa can take advantage of it. So that is the most intriguing thing to me, is how aggressive will Schiano be in the throw game, knowing that that's where they can take the shots, but also knowing that Schiano is, an absolute freak when it comes to protecting the ball. I can't wait to see how that plays out in this game.
Yeah, it's a great point, because really and I kind of wrote something similar yesterday in terms of, the red zone. They scored 1 touchdown and 6 red zone trips against Ohio State. They're not going to get. I'm pretty confident they're not going to get in the red zone 6 times against Iowa, and that margin for error is so thin in this game. And it's an interesting point, because I wouldn't be shocked if Schiano was just content just trying to run the entire game, knowing that 1 interception the game could be over in large part if they fall behind.
Right.
So,
yep.
Yeah, I mean, we really could be looking at, single digits, both sides, 6-3,
yeah.
Whatever. And I think Rutgers has done a good job at taking chances here and there, and I think they did even against Ohio State. But this is a game I could definitely see them just, it's just going to be rock against rock and see which one.
Yeah, my guess is Schiano's going to come out with almost the exact same game plan that Northwestern, Minnesota, almost everybody has come out with, in that as long as we don't turn the ball over, we're going to play conservative, because we don't want to give Iowa a lead. Okay. So my guess is that's what's going to happen. That's why you have the historically low 28-point game total right now. Iowa had 30 and 31, and everybody was talking about it. I kept telling people that I thought the Iowa-Nebraska line would open at 27.5. I thought this line would be closer to the 30, 31 point lines. So the fact that this opened up at 28, now I'm starting to wonder if the Iowa-Nebraska line is going to open up at 25, 26. I mean, it's insane. And even at 28 points, I don't know. I don't love the over. I'll tell you that much. I don't know which way I'm going with it yet, but I'm telling you right now, 2 of the most important people in this game are going to be Jai Patel and Flynn Appleby, right? Kicker and punter. You get to the 35-yard line, you better make those field goals, get to midfield, you better pin the Iowa, it's going to be a field position game. I think it's going to be really gorgeous in Iowa City, like 50 degrees and dry. So I don't think weather is going to be a big issue here. It's going to be field position, and that's where those guys are going to be important.
Well, you picked my brain perfectly, because I was going to say one thing I think is really intriguing about this matchup is both teams have really good special teams play, and obviously Iowa, with Torrey Taylor, we know him well with Adam Korsak all those years, but then Drew Stevens with that 50-plus game winner against Northwestern. it very well could come down to kicking field goals and the punt game.
It
So
will. Not very
I feel
well.
like,
It will.
yeah,
It will come down
yeah,
to that. Yeah.
well, and Cooper DeJean as the returner as well. I mean, that's Rutgers. That's the one part of special teams Rutgers doesn't really have, a real threat in terms of a returner. So I'm hoping that's not the difference. But yeah, I think it's gonna be a really close game. Closing thoughts, anything kind of with this matchup you just wanted to touch on in terms of that we haven't covered already?
Right. Rutgers offense is struggling, but Iowa's just struggling more. Rutgers defense is good. Iowa's defense is a little better. Rutgers special teams are good. Iowa's special teams are a little better. That's my honest assessment. Now, one person could say, okay, all right. And one person could say the biggest gap potentially could be Rutgers offense versus Iowa's offense, where that could be the biggest gap. I wouldn't necessarily fight you on that. I would say I do think Iowa's defense is rounding into a special defense, and the special teams are incredible. Like, I really think Torrey Taylor and Drew Stevens are the best punter kicker in the country, paired with, I think, the greatest returner in the country as well, at least on punt return. So I do think that's going to play in. Special teams are going to play in. And heck, we got a punt block, last week that helped set up a touchdown and was obviously a huge decider in the game. So it is, I just can't imagine that this is going to be any different than what we think it's going to be, which is points at a premium, yards at a premium. If one team gets over 250 yards of total offense, that's probably your winner. And then certainly turnovers. If there is, because Iowa hasn't been especially good protecting the ball, mostly from their struggling quarterback play, right? And that comes in the form of interceptions or strip sacks. They're all available for this Rutgers defense, I can assure you. So if there is a team that has an advantage in turnovers, that is going to be your winner. It's just really hard to predict turnover ratios, going into games. We kind of all find that out together, including the coaches and players. But if we're looking at all things equal, I think we're looking at all things being pretty equal in this game and it coming down to the end.
Yeah, it's. I agree with you, and I think for me as a Rutgers fan, it's always the first quarter is the scariest because it's like if they just get out of the first quarter without any crazy mistakes, they have a chance this year. In every game, if they can get into that second quarter, obviously Michigan State was a little bit of an exception because they had to come back, but otherwise, if they make it out alive in that first quarter, they're in for a fight, and I'm hoping that's the case in Iowa City. Rutgers fans are excited about it, and always appreciate your insight and talking shop with you. And I'm sure we'll chat after the game as well. But thanks so much for being back. And Jeffrey, why don't you just plug your podcast that you do every week with the Big Ten?
Well, thanks again for having me on. You're one of my favorite people to correspond with on Twitter. Love coming on the podcast. Great conversation. I am Jeffrey the Greek at Jeffrey the Greek, Jeffrey the Greek. So please give me a follow. We talk about all 14 teams on the Eyes on Big podcast. We went to bat for Rutgers before the season started when all that stupid talk about kicking Rutgers out of the Big Ten. We were pretty saying that was stupid, and we stay at it. So are we going to talk more on the biggest games in the Big Ten that involved, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan? Sure, that's kind of how it goes. But we're going to break down every team every week, including Rutgers. So if you're a Rutgers fan, spread the word. Come and listen to Eyes on Big podcast.
Well, it's always one that I like to touch base on and listen to every week, and appreciate you coming back on, and best of luck this week.
Best of luck this week as well. Obviously, we don't want the same outcome, but after that, I can assure you I'll be a big Rutgers fan.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. See you.